So was it a great stress test or what? Because I don't really know, but it seemed fun. Anyway, moving on, we're joined by Stephen McPherson, BD rep for Sonic Labs. He's going to talk speed and precision with the founder of Vertex, Darius Tabai. Vertex is a decentralized spot and perfect exchange, so speed and precision is what butters his bread. So he has some wisdom from which we can all benefit. So everyone, please give a round of applause to Darius and Stephen. Nice, man. I forgot to do the cake.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen McPherson. I work on the BD team for Sonic Labs. Welcome to the Speed and Precision in Web3 Fireside Chat with Darius Tabai from Vertex Protocol. We're going to be speaking today about speed and precision. So I guess my first question to you would be, in typically when the discussion of speed comes up in regards to blockchain, TPS is the metric that everybody goes to first. I typically think that transaction speed from the user's perspective is more important. The time to finality and the actual time between when it's submitted and when it actually, the action is done is more important, much more important than the overall load capacity of the network. What metrics do you think are more important in regards to speed?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And people boast about TPS a lot. It's sort of this phantom metric that goes around. I think part of the reason it got so much headline is because usually don't really care about transaction speed, right? Users have a synesthetic expectation of, I press a button, something happens, and then I get my confirmation. And on some chains, that's really fucking fast. So Sonic is typically fast, right? If you do something on Ethereum, it's a little bit more TikTok. But a user knows that generally, they're quite well educated.
Right.
I think the reason TPS is so popular is just because you only really care when it's slower than you thought it would be, right? And if the TPS is low and the chain gets congested, you get this horrible experience where you press a button and suddenly you just sit there looking at the screen thinking, oh man, I just lost all my money.
Right.
So I think it doesn't matter until it matters.
Right.
And then it really matters. And then I think we'll probably get into it, but I think the nice thing about something like Sonic where there's a fast time to finality, you don't get that congestion. So without the congestion, everything completes instantly, and everything more than that, the variance of completion is way lower.
Right.
And I think that's where users get that experience of I expect it to take X long, I press my button, it happens, they're happy. And that's the most important thing, is just keeping them happy and keeping a consistent experience.
Right, of course. So with Vertex specifically, your order book is off-chain, but your risk engine and your AMM are on-chain. So for you, how important is chain latency for your particular product and users?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a hyped up version of what I described. So the reason we have the sequencer off-chain is to have good liquidity, we need to be able to deal with very fast HFT clients. So they come in and they want sub-second. No blockchain can match the speed that they really need. So we need a centralized point where they can hit, trade, and those transactions then go through to chain. Where we do get issues is because our risk engine is on chain, if we see a lot of liquidations in an active market, those liquidations need to pass the chain. When they pass the chain, they need to be transacted quickly. And if they don't get transacted quickly, then we get a queue from our sequencer going to chain. And you can end up with that same experience you get to some extent with some of these slower chains. So you get a long queue, the transactions are clearing, and the real effect for users is it slows down withdrawal times because the withdrawals are in the same queue with the rest of the transactions. And same thing, if you press a button on an exchange, you want to withdraw money, want to withdraw it quickly, and if it's not coming out quickly, you think, oh, what's going on? And that's where like Sonic's great, because I don't think we've ever had a queue problem on Sonic, ever, since we launched. And we've seen some really volatile markets, but that tells you, oh, okay, this thing is working, stuff never gets blocked up, and that's been very helpful. So it does matter, but it's like a second order thing. People only care when it's not working. They don't care when it is working. That's probably the best sign that it's doing a good job.
Right, good to hear. Yeah, actually, one of the other questions I was going to ask you about is, how does your system handle a situation where maybe on another chain it doesn't handle the queue so well, or in a situation of high volatility, like how much does latency and that overall amount of performance affect your ability to maintain your operations?
Yeah, so we've had to come up with like workarounds. And the problem with workarounds is there's always like a cost to the end user. So again, maybe they don't feel it in a first order capacity, but in a second or third order capacity, they feel it. So a typical workflow we've had to come up with is to avoid these queue problems, we have built what we call like a fast withdrawal pool. And that fast withdrawal pool sits outside of the general flow of capital that's happening on Vertex. And essentially it's a loan from one pool of money against the debt of this thing is coming out of the queue. So we say, okay, we trust this one, we lend money here. But that has a cost, right? We have to charge an increased fee if everyone would use the fast withdrawal. And so users in the end suffer because they have to pay the extra fee associated with fast withdrawal because the chain can't cope with the capacity of Vertex trading at very high speeds with them. So essentially, we've just had to work around. And like most projects, if you speak to, like the unspoken thing in crypto is like most crypto projects will have lots of little workarounds they've had to put in the front end or in the UX to deal with the imperfections of the chain. So often you'll find out how valuable a chain is depending on how little they need to use those workarounds. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't feel it in the positives, you feel it in the negatives. So it kind of works that way.
Right. What piece of blockchain infrastructure would you say induces the most amount of latency for your operations or your system in general? Like RPCs or like...
Yeah, RPCs can often be a problem.
Yeah.
Again, like we've had to work around that in various ways. So sometimes we get like a private RPC from the chain team themselves, or you have to go and that's often been the solution because we need that kind of high throughput. I think sometimes it's to do with how the general consensus algorithm's working, like depending on how distributed the chain is, how distributed the nodes are, like that all adds latency in. And then the consensus algorithm on top. So some of that's unavoidable. Some of it is a bit avoidable, like the RPC stuff. But again, that's why we built the sequencer, right? Because we had this time pressure in terms of latency and throughput. And no blockchain was going to match the speeds we needed to, and the cheapness, frankly, because we take thousands of orders per second come in from users and then get cancelled and then reposted. And that cancellation repost, just if you did that all on chain, the gas cost alone would be phenomenal.
Right.
So we have this off-chain, on-chain architecture to really the most secure parts of the stack need to be on chain. So transactions and custody. And then orders is really not that consequential because an order is only important if it gets executed. And that difference, that separation just cost us a lot in terms of, or saved us a lot in terms of time and cost and kind of made the architecture what it is.
Right, interesting. So like in regards to precision, different chains use different systems to determine finality. Sonics uses a deterministic finality system as opposed to probabilistic or optimistic in a lot of other ways, which allows the network to have instant immutable finality within one block. How important is that sort of instant immutability to Vertex?
Yeah, so I think like not everyone knows this, I won't assume knowledge, but Vertex started as a project on Terra, like way back when, 3.5 years ago. And when Terra blew up, we had this sort of decision of where we were going to go and exist. And so it was go to Cosmos. And we were like, even then you could say, nah, screw that. And then the next one was, okay, do we go Solana? Seemed improbable. Like there was a lot of things going on there. And then it was really like, oh, you want to be on EVM, and we need to be on a roll-up because there wasn't sort of a performant EVM ecosystem to go to. And so it was either optimistic or ZK. And at that time, ZK just there wasn't really anything doing a proper ZK solution. And then there was Arbitrum and Optimism. And so we looked a lot at like, you know, what would happen if there was a rollback, you know, was there going to be issues, you know, how often would it be that something got challenged? You know, these were still questions then. What you see in reality is that like, I don't know how often transactions get challenged on Arbitrum or Optimism, but I assume it's almost never. I'd be very surprised if there's one a month, you know, and they do millions of transactions. I think where it has been important has just been in that throughput thing that Sonic's able to like keep the transaction load down, even in times of stress. And that has been super meaningful to user experience. So like, again, it's not like a first order thing. Like, do users care about finality? No. I think probably not, right? They ultimately trust that the system is going to do what it's going to do. I think where it is really important is you don't get those blocks, then the gas price stays about flat, transactions go through cleanly, and that's what people care about. They click the button, stuff happens. And yeah, that's where it makes sense and makes a big difference.
Right. Have you gotten any feedback from traders specifically about running like Vertex on Sonic, and any opinions in their regard? And
yeah, look, I think like broadly, you know, like the speed with which the chain's got native USDC, the speed with which it's getting integrated with all the different exchanges, frankly, people are very excited about the airdrop that's going to happen. Alongside all of those things and the fact that it's like natively EVM now, all of these things matter to people. It just makes it easier and more opportunity. Like ultimately you're fighting for attention, right? And a lot of the traders we deal with tend to be on the more professional end of the scale. I think for those guys, seeing that they can come, get things done easily, integrations work, chain is stable, these things all matter. So they're pretty excited about it. Yeah, and you see that with the activity we're doing. You know, it's one of our biggest venues, and people are doing a lot of volume there. So yeah, it's going well.
very good, very good. Yeah, Sonic's actually soon releasing a new consensus mechanism that'll reduce block times even further. We're really happy about that. Any thoughts on where we're going in the future as far as, you know, speed and precision is concerned, in your opinion?
Yeah, look, like, I think the fact is, if you look at the generation of chains that are coming out now, Sonic's in the same game as like a Monad, Mega ETH. These sorts of chains are going to be pushing how performant chains should be. I think inevitably these things get kind of commoditized, right? So you get the speed becomes like expected. I think where Sonic actually has an edge is it's probably, I'm not doing this to flatten you because I know you're on the BD team, but alongside the technology, BD team's very aggressive. They go after projects, they bring stuff into the ecosystem, they get all these integrations done. All these other little things around where it stops friction of how do you get into the ecosystem, how do you trade there? I think those are super important, and they'll probably be the things that like mark out as differentiators versus your competitors in the next year or two.
How does Vertex handle, you know, data integrity between all of these chains and syncing your off-chain order book to all of these chains at the same time? I mean,
Yeah, it's fucking tough, to be honest. I think that's the secret sauce. We spent a lot of time making sure that we maintained integrity amongst all these different things. Ultimately, the sequencer is the thing that drives all that. It's time, so I'll stop boring you about how we do data integrity. But yeah, that's kind of one for another time, I guess.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks.
Thanks very much, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.